Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of the Superhero Pantheon here at Enter the Real World. My name is Jerome and I will be joined by my colleague, of course, Brian, at Brian DeBrain on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. And what makes this episode so special, it is the 11-year culmination of the first part of the MCU, known as, I guess, the Infinity Phase, as this has been building up for the last 22 films and 11 years. And I remember seeing Iron Man for the first time in a brand new theater in Rosemont, Illinois, and 11 years later, to see it all come to a head is one of the most incredible things that I think we've ever seen in cinema, because this has been a connective story. And one of the things that I wanted to first discuss, of course, is this is going to be spoilerish. There's going to be tons of spoilers. You should assume that once our theme song ends and Brian and I start talking, that we are going to spoil the crap out of this movie. So if you have for some reason not seen it and you are getting this podcast in your ears, please save this podcast for after you see the movie, unless for some reason you don't care about this movie, and then you can, I guess, just listen away. Part of what also makes this kind of a format-breaking episode is that, very similar to last year, we are going to discuss our overall thoughts on this movie as well as the MCU. But we are also going to be doing some drafting of our favorite moments, just as we did for Infinity War. We'll try to get any of the pop culture aspects, unlike last year when neither one of us drafted the snapping, so to speak. And then we are going to draft our own team of Avengers, basically our favorite characters from this movie. So this is also going to be one of our longest episodes, probably going to be about 2 hours or so. So I want to publicly apologize to Matt Waters for giving him such a heavy episode to upload this week. But this is something that we have been so much looking forward to ever since the ending of Infinity War. And I really hope that you enjoy it. Please make sure that you are supporting us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. If you have feedback, you should always send that to superheropantheon at gmail.com. Make sure that you are leaving a 4 or 5 star review on either iTunes, Apple Podcasts, or Stitcher. You can also find us on Spotify as well. So please make sure that you are supporting not only this show, but all the work that the folks at Enter the Real World are doing. Mike Thomas and Matt Waters have been doing a tremendous job recapping the seasons of Game of Thrones. If you are not the type of person who wants to go back and rewatch all 7 seasons, they have created 7 digestible 50-minute episodes for you to catch up on with their thoughts, as well as the positives and the negatives. And I assume one more is forthcoming at the end of the 8th season. So it's really just an enormous year for popular culture. I know that Kevin Ford recently completed his Lost project, so if you are the type of person who enjoys Lost, please make sure that you are also listening to that show as well. Go back into the Real World archives and do that. And Ben and Matt, they are on their marvelous journey. They have been reviewing Captain Marvel as well as Ant-Man and the Wasp for the last couple weeks. So please make sure that you are supporting them, because even though they have a very specific focus on the MCU, they are also talking about superheroes. So I've talked for long enough, even before this episode has officially started, but I want to emphasize again that we are going to be discussing spoilers right from the get-go, so be prepared for that. Really, we hope that you enjoy this episode. This is going to be our last time talking about the MCU for a year, at least. We are not doing a Spider-Man episode. We'll explain why a little bit later. But this is going to be the last time that we discuss the MCU for quite some time. So get it while the getting's good. And thanks again for listening. And thank you for your support. Without any further ado, let's get to our review of Avengers Endgame.
God, seems like 1,000 years ago. I fought my way out of that cave. Became Iron Man. Realized I loved you. I know I said no more surprises, but I was really hoping to pull off one last one.
The world has changed. none of us can go back. All we can do is our best. And sometimes the best that we can do is to start over.
I saw all these people die. I keep telling everybody they should move on. Some do, but not us.
Even if there's a small chance, we owe this to everyone who's not in this room to try.
We will. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes.
Well, Brian, we have been waiting about a year now to watch the conclusion to the Infinity Saga, as it has been called. And I know that you've had a chance to see the movie once. I've had a chance to see Avengers Endgame twice, once regular and once in IMAX. And this has been a kind of a seminal moment in the history of the MCU. I mean, given it's been 11 years and we were anticipating what was it going to be like to have experienced this. The movie's 3 hours and 2 minutes. Amidst all that, Brian, I do not know what your thoughts are, but I want to ask you, Brian, what did you think of Avengers Endgame?
Oh man, it's kind of mind blowing. It's a lot to intake, and I just feel like the 5 year jump really changed things. Like it really there's a lot of significant changes that they kind of brushed over, but man, there's a lot to intake because especially in the first 20 minutes of the movie, it completely changes the whole landscape of the whole universe. And this is gonna be spoiler, heavy. So just out of the way that everyone comes back at the end, but it's that 5 year gap that kind of blows my mind. That Spider-Man is back, but he's back 5 years later, yet he's the same age. So technically he's 21. So it's just a lot of stuff, and then the whole time travel thing, kind of just what the whole like straight line is of the timeline, and then going back and fixing things. And now that Steve Rogers did what we thought we might do, and just stay with Peggy Carter and get that final last dance. So it's a lot to intake, and everything's coming full circle. And everyone in my theater was crying their eyes out and screaming, and then everyone getting electric at the final battle, and that final battle was like, I don't know, one of the best battle sequences in cinema history. I don't know. It definitely was better than most of the Lord of the Rings battle sequences, which is saying a lot. So, Game of Thrones, you're on the clock.
Absolutely, and it's fitting you say on the clock because we are in the midst of the NFL draft going on. So it's just funny that you say that. I mean, I think that the expectations for this movie were monumentally high because the reality is that this is the only time period when people have to wait for this movie. Like in 6 months to a year, like when our kids are watching these movies, they're just going to go right from Infinity War right to watching Endgame, and there's not going to be that anticipation that builds. And when you binge watch these 22 movies over the course of 59 hours, as some people did, and if you watch those movies for the very first time, I don't think a lot of it would sink in. Just the moments there, and there's so many moments. So we're going to draft our favorite moments, and it is going to be a long draft because there are just so many damn moments in this movie that either brought people to tears, made people laugh, There was just so much. And I think it would have been so easy for this movie to not be good. And in fact, I think it's probably either the first or the second best MCU movie that is ever going to be made at this point. I think the only thing that's really in contention in my mind is Black Panther. I think what this movie is able to do is not only climax the story that was started in Infinity War, but it was also able to finish the 22 film arc. And that is not something that is easy to do. I don't think it's something that's ever been done. I don't think it's ever something that will be done. When you are climaxing literally 11 years, 22 movies, and you are giving nods to each franchise got some sort of a nod or some sort of an acknowledgement. And you think about it, like, think of this. 3 of the directors were acting in this movie. 3 of the MCU directors acted in this movie. And you had cast members. Like, think of this cast list, Brian. You had Michael Douglas. You had Robert Redford. You had Angela Bassett. You had Tilda Swinton. And all 4 of those people that I just mentioned are some of the biggest movie stars, Academy Award winners. And they were in the movie for probably a combined 10 to 12 minutes, if that. I'm not even counting the fact that there were a ridiculous amount of characters. Of course, everybody coming back at the end. But part of what made this movie better than Infinity War in some ways was the fact that this movie was able to focus so much more on the core characters. And I think that that's what this movie needs. In order for this movie to be successful, it had to focus on the core characters. Just as Infinity War, the main thread line was Thanos, and this really wasn't about the Avengers. This time, it had to be. And I think that is the thing that will stick with me, is the fact that they were able to focus so well on the characters and really dwell in kind of the sadness and the grief of what happened. They didn't just resolve this situation in the first hour and then it meant nothing. It took 2.5 hours for the second snapping to happen and to bring everybody back. And I just think that they did an absolutely incredible job. And there are a lot of criticisms that can be levied against the MCU. I certainly understand those. But for me, you could not have asked for a better conclusion to a film franchise than this. And, they are, of course, going to make tons of MCU movies, I'm sure, for the rest of our lives. But if you told me that this was the last movie of the MCU and they would never make another one, I would have a hard time arguing, because I don't think it could get more satisfactory than this.
Yeah, and it felt like it was just like this closed book ending too. Like there was no preview or what's to come, or like there was no after credit scene, and it was just like the mid credit scene was just them acknowledging all the original 6. So definitely a different approach, and it's probably a good thing they kind of went away from that, because we have all these expectations about the end credit scene and stuff like that. But I did feel like, man, where do we go now? And like, there's just so many open threads now. But at the same time, it felt like this chapter's ended, or this book has ended. So it's really sad. But Tony died, and we all kind of expected that. But the way he died was really, it meant something. And then the whole audience kind of felt like this cathartic moment of emotion just purging out at that moment. Especially when Peter Parker comes back, and then when he came back, there was this eruption from the crowd, and then him seeing Tony, die at the end. It was just devastating, man. But I felt like I was crying like multiple times in this movie, just because like the full circle effect, you know what I mean? Investing all your emotions and time in the beginning of the saga, and then having these full circle moments at the end. I mean, Cap finally got the dance. I never thought that would happen. I thought we were way past that point, but with time travel, you can do anything, right? So we kind of talked about it on the preview, about how possibly Cap could finally go back in time and get his last dance. And so basically he went back in time and retired in the past. So technically, there's 2 Captain Americas in the past, one trapped in the ice and one living out his retirement. So it's the way time travel works, but it kind of changes some things with the whole Agent Carter show now, I guess. I guess that doesn't really technically happen in that same format, but yeah, just a lot of changes in the MCU. And I love the first 20 minutes where, after they realize that they can't reverse the snap, and then you kind of go 5 years later, just seeing to see Thor the way Thor was just like depressed, and then they kind of masked his depression with like, his alcoholism and stuff like that. That really was like a whole change of the guard of the character. Like it was just a new Thor all over again, and it was just really shocking and depressing. But at the same time, you can't help feel like he feels like the guilt of like not aiming for the head the first time. And you kind of feel that guilt throughout the movie. Whenever you see Thor and him being in this depressed self pity kind of thing going on, and him, just like sitting in the background, just not being the Thor that we're used to. That was shocking. So I did not expect that. And then just the 5-year jump alone, it's just like, I can't believe they did that. I mean, we kind of thought that maybe they'd do that, but then they would go back to that moment before the snap and kind of go back 5 years before that. But no, like it just takes place 5 years later, and everyone comes back 5 years later, which is kind of crazy the way they did that. Because if you think about it, like that makes Peter Parker 21 now. Black Panther is 5 years old. Like everyone is 5 years older, even though they were gone for 5 years, right? So it's just this crazy thing. The repercussions we're going to start seeing in Spider-Man, we're going to see how that works out, because we're living in a post-snap world, and I guess the world will acknowledge that the snap did happen. So that's kind of crazy. I thought they would kind of just wipe it from people's memory, but no. Like, everyone's going to remember the snap, and we're going to live with those consequences. So we didn't get really a preview of what's to come with those consequences, but we're definitely going to get something with Spider-Man to kind of see where the MCU kind of goes from there and how they're going to acknowledge it. I mean, they got to acknowledge, Tony Stark right off the bat at the start of Spider-Man, because he is now, like we thought he would be, he's now the Uncle Ben of the MCU, so to speak, and he's that Uncle Ben character that's kind of going to motivate Peter Parker for the rest of his films.
Right, and even though Tony Stark does not utter the words, "with great power comes great responsibility," he did a lot of showing and not telling by taking responsibility, ultimately, finally, once and for all time, essentially doing that. And it's worth noting, this movie starts out in a very unusual way. We actually started with a needle drop, Brian, and that was a big surprise. There was no Stanley tribute for this movie, which I guess makes sense since the tone of this one is much different than Captain Marvel. I am sure that we will get some sort of a Stanley tribute after Spider-Man, since that is what he is most known for creating. But as far as the way this movie started, we started off with Hawkeye and his family. Brian, there were 3 farms in this movie.
I noticed, and I noticed that, like, right off the bat, like, hey, we're at a farm. Like, this is definitely an Avengers movie if we're at a farm. So, that I like those little things, and I know that, like, we joke about it, but it just, again, full circle. Like, it makes everything feel like, everything was meant to be. And putting it on a farm, it just makes it more meant to be, I think.
And of course, we see Hawkeye's family get dusted right from the start, and that sets up his Ronin character and the fact that he goes around killing people and assassinating people. And I think that they really do a good job of illustrating just how dark of a place that Hawkeye goes to. And then when we hit after the big credits, the sequence, then we get to Tony Stark, and basically Tony Stark is going to die, and then Captain Marvel saves him, and I don't think that's what anybody thought was going to happen. I think everybody thought it was going to be Pepper Potts doing the saving in some way, but in fact, it is Captain Marvel doing the saving. We see Captain America shaving his luscious beard right at the start. I think that also threw people off a little bit. And we get to see Robert Downey Jr. go to his really dark place again. And I thought that was very, very surprising that things would get so dark right away between him and Captain America. We see Tony Stark mention his vision that he had a few years ago in Age of Ultron. He mentions that. And we get a lot of references to what has happened in the past. And you couldn't do that. You couldn't have Captain America and Iron Man interact if you weren't going to do that, and if you were not going to have them kind of be in this very bad place. And even though Captain Marvel is there, this still feels very much like a moment where we are really focusing on kind of the original cast.
Yeah, and then when you see Tony at the beginning, because he's been in space for so long, they digitized him to make it seem like he's malnourished, and I thought that was a nice touch. And it was very shocking to see him because he's so weak and he looks like he's like a cancer patient about to die. And it's just like, that's kind of like the woes of space, being in there for 21 days, right? And then him kind of having this, bond with Nebula. I thought that was kind of cool to see them have at the beginning of the movie. Again, it's just kind of shocking because the way that they do the jump, like, I mean, we have Rocket in the Avengers now. Like, I mean, who would have saw that coming? And now he's like an official member to the point that he's like a captain. And they kind of brushed over that kind of little thing, but I was just kind of shocked. Like, wow, like Rocket is an Avenger, and they're treating him like, you know, like just a normal Avenger. They're not even asking his background. I guess it's just, you know, over 5 years. I'm assuming that they just probably asked him anyway and got to know him. But it's just crazy to see Rocket be there, and then Captain Marvel comes, and then she's gone for most of the movie again, which I thought was weird. I don't know why they did that, but she disappears after they kill Thanos at the beginning, right? Because after they find out that, you know, Thanos destroys the stones and the snap can't be undone at that point, they just go ape shit and they just kill Thanos, and that's totally fine. I get that.
I had zero problem with that, and in fact, I really like that they did it because that means that Thanos was not going to hang over the whole movie, which is what would have happened if they didn't do it. And I know that there is the big final battle sequence with the 2014 versions of these characters, but I love the fact that they just killed Thanos right away. Like, there's no bullshitting around. They just do it. And Thor's like, I aim for the head this time. And I thought that was such an amazing moment, and I think the crowd was legitimately shocked by it, even though you could kind of see it coming. In a way, they kind of predicted it with the fact that there was nobody there. The fact that Thanos was clearly not in the best shape anyway because of what he had done to destroy the stones. And it is worth pointing out that they talk about the effect of the stones on people, but it wasn't the snap that basically almost kills Thanos, but in fact it is what he does to destroy the stones that leaves him limping, and like he kind of looks like Two-Face, and he doesn't have an arm, or he can't really use his arm, so he is so vulnerable, and it's just very easy to just behead him, and that is exactly what Thor does. And
Exactly. So it's just kind of shocking, the ramifications of all this, especially the first 5 years, like with the Thanos thing, and then what kind of disappointed me is that we saw this new Hulk, this Doctor Hulk kind of character, and this is the first time we're kind of mentioning Hulk. But man, I wish we would have seen that whole journey of him just kind of like making peace with the Hulk and kind of merging the personalities together. I feel like that's a great story that they just jumped over, and I really want to see that. And I know they didn't have time to develop it, but man, that would have been something to watch, because that's what I was like really looking forward to find that resolution. But they kind of just jumped over it and then gave us a resolution to it. So that's kind of the weaknesses I found. Like, I thought they kind of did. It was cool to see Hulk like that, but I just feel like there's a story to tell there that we could have seen. But I don't know, you save it for the app or something. But there's definitely a story there. Like, I see a lot of stories in that first 20 minutes that they kind of just brushed over that I really want to know. Like, I want to know Rocket's like acceptance into the Avengers. I want to know Carol Danvers and her journey, and then her being an Avenger, and then cutting her hair like the comics, which is I marked out for that, and then, you know, being her, you know, she's like the cosmic Avenger, kind of defending everyone around the universe. So that's kind of her job. There's a lot of different dynamics that got created in the first 20 minutes that I want to like delve into, but we just kind of didn't have time for that. But it's a whole new dynamic, and the fact that Rocket is like a commander in the Avengers still blows my mind.
this is really throwing you off, I can tell. And I think one of the coolest aspects of this to me is that you got to see these different character interactions, and one of the coolest things that I think we got to see is just a moment of reflection. And this kind of reminded me a lot of The Leftovers, which is an HBO show. You can go listen to Ben and Matt talk about that show, Countdown to Destruction. But there is this moment when Captain America is leading a support group, just as Captain Falcon used to do. And Captain America is listening to this story of this man who is played by one of the co-directors, Joe Russo, and he talks about going on this date with another man and kind of it being the first time. And it just felt like this really small but significant moment, and I really appreciated, number one, that they took just a couple minutes to talk about the realities of living in this world where half the population is gone, and then kind of living and dwelling in that with people who are not the Avengers. And the fact that he was gay. I mean, I think that is something that is significant, because it's not really something that's been done in the MCU. There have been some implications about Valkyrie, possibly even Captain Marvel, but this is the first time that we've really had a gay character on screen, and that is something that I think is worth mentioning. And there's another small moment, and we're gonna get. I want to delve into Ant-Man and what Paul Rudd is doing a little bit later. But there is this moment when he asks the child, or not a child, but like a young teenager on a bicycle about what happened, and the look that he gives, and just how fast he drives away. Like that, there is some serious PTSD going on with that kid in that moment, and I know that there wasn't a lot of that. Maybe there could have even been more, but I'm glad that those two moments exist in this film that is loaded with Avengers, with superhero moments. It was good to see that.
Yeah, and you gotta mention Black Widow, Scarlett Johansson, man. Like her performance, it's probably her best performance in all of the MCU movies. I think, like her just trying to cope and try to hold everything together 5 years later and try to be the Avengers and be that leader. It's kind of heartbreaking, man. And you see it, like she's like breaking down in almost like every scene because she has this guilt, and and credit to her in her performance, man. It really brings out the darkness and the emotions, and the whole like you see the whole like devastation on her face. Like it feels like she's about to cry in every scene, and like it's just hard to watch her because you can feel like this sadness in her, especially when she's like talking to the other Avengers 5 years later, right? And this is before they try to fix the snap, and like she doesn't even care about her hair anymore. Like she's a different person. She's hardly eating, kind of thing, and then Cap's there to kind of help her cope. But man, she just seems so like devastated, and I've never seen that in a Black Widow. Like I've never seen Black Widow act more human than this movie, and it was sad. And then she ends up being the one sacrificing herself for the Soul Stone, and I did not see that coming.
Nobody saw it coming because there's supposed to be a Black Widow movie, which who knows if we're even going to get that now.
Yeah, that was the thing. I guess that's not happening. I guess that was never the plan. I don't know, but I thought there was a missed opportunity there. I thought maybe Cap should have been the one to go to Vormir and then try to figure it out and have some last confrontation with Red Skull. That's what I was thinking, but they didn't go there, and they even acknowledged like you try go over there and talk to the red dude in the cape, and there was no reaction from Cap because Cap doesn't even know that's Red Skull. So I thought that was a little interesting thing there, that he's talking about Red Skull to Cap, but he doesn't even know that it's Red Skull.
Well, it was also interesting in the funeral scene that the General and the Hulk were together, and there was no confrontation with those two either. Which we'll get to that scene a little bit later. But it's just, there are definitely some things that they did an incredible job of doing, but it just feels like there's so much more that they could have done. This could have very easily been a 6-hour movie or a 6-hour miniseries at this point, with the way that we're talking, with so many things that they could have developed. But let's talk about Ant-Man. I agree with you that Scarlett Johansson is great in this movie. I think Paul Rudd, as far as MVP performers, man, like Paul Rudd kills it. And I think one of the things that the Ant-Man justifiably gets accused of, or that franchise gets accused of, is kind of being the palate cleanser after an Avengers movie, or something that is inconsequential. But Paul Rudd is fantastic, and he doesn't really get a lot of people to play off of for a good little bit there. We do get a cameo. I believe that was Dr. Ken Jeong in as the security person. Was that right?
Yep, that's definitely Dr. Ken. Dr. Ken Jeong. Like that's definitely him.
And of course, and we get the most significant appearance of a rat since the end of The Departed. Spoilers for The Departed. But the rat, I don't know if it's he or she, saves Ant-Man and brings him out of the quantum realm. And he sees what is happening and has a little wagon with him, which was really random. And we see him running through San Francisco and trying to discover who has been snapped away and who hasn't. And he discovers his daughter has aged 5 years. And that was a really great scene, because again, we talk about Ant-Man as being inconsequential, but at this point, like, Ant-Man is clearly going to be very consequential, and the fact that he gets a moment with his daughter before all the chaos goes, because I think it would have been really easy to just snap everybody away, and I'm glad that they didn't do that they did have those moments before the time travel and before some of the bigness. I thought that was really important to have some of these characters have some catharsis.
Yeah, when he sees his daughter for the first time and he just starts crying, like I was like, whoa, like Ant-Man's crying right now. This is like a big deal. Like Ant-Man crying to me is like a big deal. Like it just signifies the whole stakes of the movie and like the devastation. And for him, like usually being this, comedy figure in the MCU, and all of a sudden he's like the serious figure now, and then he's the one pleading with Captain America to let's go back in time and Tony and all that kind of thing. It's like something I didn't expect out of Ant-Man. You know what I mean? Like Ant-Man's the kind of guy that will just, I don't know, just do it for his family or whatever, and then not necessarily do it for the whole good of the world kind of thing. I think, but for me, it's just kind of like it's just so out of place for him to do that. But yeah, I just a lot of shocking things. Like I said, just all these characters changing all of a sudden, and to see Ant-Man be this leader kind of thing, and being an actual member of the Avengers too. Like he was never really truly a member of the Avengers. Like he did the Civil War thing as helping Captain America, but he was never like an Avenger. And now he's like part of the team. So I thought that was really cool too. Just a lot of significant changes, and Ant-Man being that, and him carrying out going throughout the movie, and just like trying to be funny as well here and there, but just yeah, that rat, man. I guess that rat is part of that 14 million whatever, or out of those 14 million possibilities, that rat was part of that one chance, I believe, to get him out. I think that was all part of the plan. So I think that rat is part of the plan. So Doctor Strange knew what he was doing.
Absolutely. He saw that rat coming a mile away. And of course, that is when we get into the discussion about whether time travel is realistic. And there's some debating. There's some references to Back to the Future. If Universal did not have the rights, and Disney has a lot of rights, but they don't own Back to the Future, man, could we have gotten a Back to the Future score callback? How amazing would that have been? Especially since Alan Silvestri also did this score as well.
Well, you almost called it because you said that Mark Ruffalo would be the one to explain the timelines, but it ended up being Hulk and
Tilda Swinton's character, whose name is escaping me.
Yes, the elder from Doctor Strange, we'll call her. But yeah, you're pretty much on the money on that, because they were literally explaining the same thing, and I was like, oh shit, Jerome got this one. Like literally, like that exact scene was like you called it, and they were talking about the multiple possible timelines. And I kept thinking the same thing, like if they remove this, it's just gonna fuck up time. But the way they do it is that they're gonna go back in time again and prevent that from even happening, so the timeline takes place. So in essence, what they're trying to say is the timeline will always go forward no matter what, and the events that take place in the past are significant and still happen, because in order for the events to take place in Endgame, the events in the past still have to happen, right? So even though they go back in time and take the stones out of place, they do go back in time at the end, with Captain America does anyway, and puts the stones back in time to make the timeline still a straight line, if that makes any sense at all. And that's what they were trying to say.
They desperately did everything they could. There were two different explanations of this. They tried to do it with Ant-Man. There was a scene with War Machine and Hawkeye when they were doing the test run, and they did the scene with the Elder and the Hulk. So they tried many different ways to explain this. I'm still not totally sure that it works, but I think with time travel movies, what you almost have to do is you almost have to accept the premise that this is what's happening, accept their explanations, and just move on. Because if you really try to think about time travel, that goes for any time travel movie, including your Back to the Futures, your Terminators. It's just going to break your brain, because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, especially when you watch like the Flash TV show. I think the Flash TV show helped me interpret the timeline better in this movie, because the way they interpret time is kind of the same thing. Like some people in the present time will like do something to try to alter the future, but that future will still happen because you're in the current timeline of the events that makes that situation happen. If that makes, I know it's complicated, people, and we knew this would be complicated when we talked about it, but that's the way they kind of interpret it, and I'm just going to go with it as well, because by the end of the movie, my friend was confused. Like, he thought that Loki was alive again. Like, no, dude, that didn't technically happen. I mean, it happened, but it's not going to happen, because they're going to go back and just replace the stone as if it was never there. So
Right. And I think, the Loki stuff I think is still confusing, because it is technically not that version of the Tesseract that was returned. So I'm wondering if they're going to use that as the premise for the Disney Plus show that they are developing for Loki. We'll see how that develops. But amidst all of the time chaos is we get the big reveal of Tony Stark having a daughter named Morgan. It was at this point, when they are going to their third farm of the movie, when it is only about 45 to 50 minutes in, this is when I pretty much realized that Tony Stark was going to bite it, because he had a daughter, Pepper Potts was there, he had a farm, he was retired, and he was going to come back out of retirement for one more job, Brian, and we all know what happens when you come out of retirement for one more job. This it was fairly obvious to me that it was going to bite it at this point, and we hadn't even gotten there. There were a couple of moments later on when it became even more obvious, when his dad mentions not self-sacrificing and being all about himself, and the interaction with Doctor Strange. I mean, there were giant signposts telling you that Tony Stark was going to die in this movie, and they did a really good job of fooling everyone in Infinity War by teasing his death, not doing it, and then having him be alive, but then just killing him anyway. But I don't know about you, man, but it was pretty obvious once we saw that daughter.
Yeah, I started to figure out too, like, especially, and I kept playing it in my head, the one chance he saved Tony's life. Why would you save Tony's life? He must be significant by the end of the movie. I mean, he's the one who figures out the time travel, so that's very significant. Had Tony been killed in an Infinity War, they would still not have been doing the time travel, right? So that's kind of the sacrifice that Doctor Strange had to make in order for Tony to make his sacrifice later on, basically. So you kind of started to figure that out, and the whole idea of them going to the 70s, I was like, oh my god, they're doing all this fun stuff in the middle of this movie right now, and I just can't handle it. We got young Michael Douglas in the 70s. I marked out for that. Dude, when he went in that room and then he saw Peggy's desk, like, I just started like tearing up, man. Like, oh my god, they're gonna reunite, and then they kind of teased it, and then they went later on with The Last Dance. But yeah, them going to 1970, I thought that was a nice little touch. Seeing Tony's dad, just a lot of just callbacks and just like full circle stuff, and then, okay, well, I'll save it for later, but one of my favorite moments happens around that time, before they go to 1970, but I'll save it for the draft, when we draft our moments later.
I really loved the time heist stuff. I loved the discussion of the stones. I think whenever you have a heist movie of any sort, some of the best scenes in the movie are the actual discussions of how the heist is going to happen. You look at Ocean's 11, the best scene in that movie is probably when they're discussing how they are going to rob the casino. I think about a movie like Widows. They're discussing like how they're going to bust in and do this. I love that stuff. And they again spent a few minutes, it wasn't a lot of time, but talking about how they were going to get all of the various stones and where they were going to have to go. And I love the fact that they kind of simplified it into 3 teams with very clear ideas of where they're going. Also places that are familiar to the audience already. Going to the Battle of New York in 2012, thus reliving part of the first Avengers movie. Going to Asgard and reliving God help us. They relived part of Thor: The Dark World, which if you had told me that this is where we're going to end up, I probably would have told you were crazy. And then, of course, going to 2014, going to 2 different planets and getting those 2 stones, and reliving parts of Guardians of the Galaxy and doing an important callback to Infinity War. So I loved it, and I love the time testing scene where we get a baby Ant-Man, we get a teenage Ant-Man, and an older Ant-Man. I mean, there's so many tremendous scenes. The scene with Ant-Man trying to eat a taco and just literally seeing all the chaos around him, and just seeing how crazy things are with War Machine coming in, and Rocket, and Nebula, and Hulk giving him the tacos. I mean, there was just so much wild stuff in here that it's possible that you could spend 6 hours discussing this 3-hour movie, because there are just so many little things that they get right. There are so many big things that they get right. We're going to talk about some of the insane cameos in a couple minutes here, but just even those moments of Ant-Man eating a taco and just witnessing the chaos. I mean, it's amazing to me to see that.
Yeah, and then, well, just tying it back to, I was still shocked with Nebula being there. Like, seeing Nebula being a good guy and, like, being a commander on the fucking Avengers, man. Wow. I mean, I just didn't see that coming. I mean, you kind of saw it coming at the end of Infinity War, but it's just so shocking. There's a lot of shocking things that really, I still can't really, like, accept it in my head, just seeing all the stuff I did. Like, next week when I'm off from work, like I'm definitely going to see this more, like 2 or 3 times in theaters and get everything down. But I still can't wrap it around my head that Nebula and Rocket are just casually walking by and are Avengers. Like, I wanted to see that acceptance into the team kind of thing, but I don't think we'll ever get that. But I guess this also means that the Guardians themselves are now loosely affiliated with the Avengers through Rocket and Thor. So
Absolutely, and we got the big moment with Tony revealing that he is the one that figured out time travel. What a moment that it was when he's just alone in his cabin talking to Friday, and he just figures out time travel. And it's a great moment, but it is this realization that he knows what to do, and because he's Tony Stark and he's obsessive, he has to go through with this. Like, he has to. And even Pepper Potts, who has been through him and through so much with him, she even accepts that this is something that he has to do. And again, it's another sign that he's probably going to bite it at the end. But we also get the big. I'm gonna make the wrestling reference instead of you. We get the Mega Powers handshake between Iron Man and Captain America as they come back together, and Iron Man gives Captain America a shield. And despite everything that they have been through, they're going to go again on one last mission together. And even that moment, I think, is something that they could have very easily just either not done or not done it well. And I think they executed it so perfectly. And Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr., who really understand how to play these two characters, I mean, they just killed it. And even when they get into New York and are bantering off of each other, we'll get to kind of their scene in both New York and when they travel back even further to New Jersey. But I mean, just those small moments, I think, work out so well.
yeah, I love those little moments too. And like the first time they get back together, it's like they're still fighting, right? And then it took them an extra 5 years just to like levy that situation. So I like how it just took time for them to kind of heal, even right after the devastation. They're still fighting, and then it still takes 5 years for them to kind of get back together. So that just kind of shows you the relationship they had and how much Civil War affected both of them. So I think that kind of has some significant stakes as well. So that kind of shows the repercussions of Civil War to that extent. So I thought that was really good.
Of course. And let's just talk about each kind of time situation on its own. Let's first talk about New York. I really want to start there because we get incredible interactions with Bruce Banner and the person in charge at Tilda Swinton's character. I just think
I remember now the ancient one.
the Ancient One. So we get the conversation with Bruce and the Ancient One is so great. And when the Ancient One hears about what Doctor Strange did, it's kind of a revelation to both them and a reminder to the audience that this is in fact what happened. And I think Tilda Swinton she was so much better in this movie than she was in Doctor Strange. In Doctor Strange, she felt so opaque, and here I think there was a little bit more levity to her character, and of course, because it's one scene versus being in half a movie, I thought their interactions were much better, and I really like that Tilda Swinton was in here because, man, she did a good job of explaining some very, very difficult dialogue and explaining the timeline.
Yeah, like we mentioned before, that's the Back to the Future 2, timeline drawing on the chalkboard scene that they kind of just played out. She just literally drew a line of time, and then her and Banner started talking about it. And then Banner actually convinces her that they can maintain the timeline, and that in order to do that, they have to go back in time once they get the stones, and then stop themselves and place the stones back into place in the timeline as if they were never there. So once he explains that and then mentions Doctor Strange, like, yeah, she kind of gives in and realizes that Strange is the guy that is the one that's going to be the one that she's going to hand the reins down to, and B, that like she picked the right guy because she obviously immediately knows that as soon as he says that, she knows that she has to give up the stone because that's the right thing to do, because she picked the chosen one basically to take her spot, and the chosen one 5 years from the future is already doing his thing. So it's like she knew that she picked the right guy and that this was the right thing to do and give up the stone at this moment in time to save the current reality.
And let's talk about what Captain America has to go through. As first he goes into the elevator. This is clearly meant to be a hearkening back to Winter Soldier. And it is such an amazing moment because you think you know where this is going to go, right? The Captain America, just like in Winter Soldier. He's going to beat all these people up in the elevator, and it's going to look really cool. But he doesn't have to, because all he has to do is say two little words, Brian, and those two words are...
Hail Hydra.
What a moment. Like, the crowd pops so hard at both of my screenings, because it is both a callback to the comics where Captain America did, quote-unquote, join Hydra, but it's also a great moment because Captain America doesn't have to fight. So he gets away with the staff. And then what does he have to do but fight himself? And himself, the one version from 2012, is wearing that awful, awful suit that everybody made fun of. And the Russos and everybody else, they decide to make fun of it too, as Captain America gets to fight himself. And it's a really tremendous scene as I'm going to call him Captain America Prime, is able to defeat his younger compatriot by mentioning the Bucky's alive and then using the staff, and then commenting, just as Ant-Man did earlier, about that being America's ass.
Yeah, that's so funny that 2012 Captain America thought it was Loki that he was fighting, because Loki somehow got away, and we'll get to mention it later, but and then them fighting each other, and then the 2012 version of Cap going, I can do this all day, and the audience just lost it. And then the other Cap goes, yeah, I know. It was so funny. And then he outwits himself. Oh, man, it's just great. And I did not expect that moment, like Captain versus Captain. But they did it, and it was this nice little moment in the middle of the movie that they were just having fun with. And it's like, yeah, what if Captain ran him into himself, and he fought himself in 2012? And they did it, man. So they had a lot of fun with that aspect.
And then one of the other Stones, of course, gets away because Tony Stark gets hit by Hulk. And if you want to talk about a Back to the Future 2 moment, that was it, because there's, of course, some moment when Marty McFly has the sports betting book in his hand, and then he gets hit with a door. And what happens in this movie? Tony Stark gets hit by a door because Hulk did not, in fact, want to go down the stairs. One of the best moments in the entire movie, and definitely something that harkened back to the Future 2. And we got another very shocking cameo as Robert Redford returns to play the Secretary once again. And it was just a really cool callback moment where he gets to interact with some of the other Avengers, and it kind of closes the loop on this entire storyline, and even making reference to Hydra, and just making this world feel more realized. And of course, Loki is able to, quote unquote, get away. We'll see if that has any sort of ramifications, but they do not get a stone. And in fact, Captain America and Iron Man have to go back even farther, and we'll get to that in a moment. But any thoughts on that particular sequence? Anything else that you want to say about New York?
Well, I thought Robert Redford was going to be in Captain Marvel as the young Robert Redford, and then, of course, they just switched that on us and brought him back here. And I thought it was really interesting that they showed you how Hydra got the weapons after the Battle of New York. I thought that was really interesting, because everyone was kind of like, well, how'd they get the stuff? Well, they're part of S.H.I.E.L.D. inside a Hydra, or they're a Hydra inside of S.H.I.E.L.D., so obviously they kind of maneuvered their way. But right off the bat, I guess they were just right off the bat going after the weapons. And you see Robert Redford even try to take Loki as like the prisoner of the United States, and then Thor was not having that. So I thought that was like a nice little scene that kind of tied things together, or some of like the missing aspects of between like Avengers 1 and Avengers 2, and like how like the weapons even got into the hands of the bad guys in the first place. So I thought that was a nice little touch, and you can I love the little callbacks to Hydra, because I know Hydra's gone now, but like just seeing those characters again from 2013, 2014, I was like, oh my god, here we go again. They're going to have to deal with Hydra all over again. And they kind of like avoided Hydra basically when they went back in time. But yeah, just and then seeing Hulk from from his perspective, and then because he's not the crazy wild Hulk anymore, he's like the smart Hulk. He goes in pretending to be the other Hulk, and he's just like, oh, smash, and then he hits a car, like, really, like, nonchalantly. Oh, man, that was a great moment for the Hulk.
Lots of great moments in this movie, and I hope we can get as many of them as possible. Let's go to New Jersey in circa 1970. There are 3 prominent cameos, 3 or 4 of them, in fact, as we get Yvette Nicole Brown from Community playing I guess a secretarial character in this movie, another callback to Community. I believe she is the 4th person from the Community franchise to be a part of the MCU. We also had young Michael Douglas for a scene. We also had John Slattery from Mad Men in 1970, which was pretty trippy for me as somebody who watches Mad Men or watched Mad Men. And of course, we have Haley Atwell. And we get some closure on the Howard Stark, Tony Stark relationship as they get to have a very powerful conversation about having kids and building a family. And it was a real tear jerker of a scene. And because you really didn't get a lot of closure with Tony and Howard, and this was an opportunity to give everybody that. And we would also get something else with Thor and his mom a little bit later. But what a great moment! One of those small character moments that Infinity War did not have time to deliver, but in this movie they really took their time to have these moments. And for Tony to get this one, I thought was really well executed.
Yeah, it was more of a hint, like this is him coming like full circle, having that last moment with his father that he never got. We kind of got that preview when we saw the barf technology in Civil War, right? That last moment that they had together was kind of like a sour moment, and this gave him that final moment of closure with his father. So that was a really nice touch. And yeah, that scene is just so. I mean, the fact that they go back and you see young Michael Douglas and all the little things they do and all the little details and stuff. And of course, like the whole, like, the costumes and stuff. I just thought it was a nice little thing they did in the middle of the movie. Like, we're gonna have some fun, and we're gonna go back to 1970, and we're gonna have Tony talk to his dad. And I was like, wow, we're going here, and they did it, and it was a magical moment, man. And I'm glad they left it in. I know the movie's 3 hours, and you could have easily just had them get the stone in 2012 and not even go to 1970, but it gave them the opportunity to do this and. Just all these little things, and the one thing I did want was like some kind of interaction between Michael Douglas and Robert Downey Jr., but we really didn't get that, and I was hoping they kind of would have done that here, but I guess they'll save it for another time, or maybe just the whole feud between the Starks and the Pyms is mainly between like Howard and Hank Pym, so maybe that's kind of like where that feud lies. But I wish we kind of had more with Robert Downey and Hank Pym.
It's also in 1970 when we got Stanley's final cameo as he is a driver talking about making love, not war. And I think it's always going to be a historical note that this is his last cameo, but I can't help but think that either Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse or Captain Marvel really was kind of the perfect way to cap off his cameos and his journey in these Marvel movies. I don't know what to think. I mean, like, I thought it was really funny, but it did not feel as good as his previous two.
Yeah, because it kind of felt like they ended the Stan Lee like cameo, but I guess because these are the final chapters, and I'm counting Spider-Man as well, because Spider-Man is Far From Home is kind of still part of Phase 3 technically. So, yeah, I guess they just wanted, like, this whole, like, journey, the Infinity Saga, to at least have a Stan Lee cameo in every one, so that makes sense. So, the timing of everything with Stan Lee's death is also weird, and everything, the way that kind of played out, that, the last big movie of the journey, it has his final cameo. So, I actually expect him to have a cameo in Far From Home, just to kind of make it complete so that every single movie in the Infinity Saga has a Stan Lee cameo, but, yeah, it's a good way to kind of end it, but it wasn't nearly as big as a pop for the when I saw Captain Marvel, which is kind of shocking. I thought the Stan Lee cameo would be huge in this movie, but
my guess is that some people didn't even realize that was Stan Lee, because even on first viewing, I wasn't sure if that was him. I mean, it definitely took a minute or two for me to realize that. People were much more cognizant at my second viewing than the first one.
yeah, I mean, I could tell right off the bat, but some people are just not used to seeing Stan Lee from the 70s. So I totally understand that. It's like we're just used to seeing the current generation of, like, old man Stan Lee. So that kind of makes sense.
All right, let's go to Asgard, which ultimately has probably the littlest or the smallest bit of action, as it's just Rocket and Thor, because this is supposed to be the easy one, because all they have to do is talk to Jane Foster and get the Infinity Stone from her body, or get the Infinity Slush from her body. And Thor is not in a good way. He is Fat Thor, and while the Fat Thor stuff I think works for a scene or two, I'm not sure if it works for the whole movie. And Chris Hemsworth's performance, I think from the comedy angle, I think it really works. I don't know, like, I think there are parts of it that worked and parts of it that didn't. I again love that Rocket Raccoon is always giving the big motivational talks to Thor. He did it in Infinity War. He does it here by slapping him in the face and talking about what he needs to do, and then Thor doesn't do it anyway. But this, of course, is going to be remembered as the return of Natalie Portman to the MCU, as she is in the movie for a good solid 30 seconds and doesn't say a word, but she just walks away. And Rocket apparently, the fact that we didn't get a scene with Natalie Portman interacting with a raccoon is a major disappointment in my view.
I'm gonna just put this out there. I think that they just used B-roll footage. It looked like they used B-roll footage to me. They kind of just slipped that in, so they wouldn't have to bring her in. But I mean, if you're gonna bring in Natalie Portman, you have her talk at least, on screen for new scenes. But if not, like, you might as well just use B-roll, right? So I think they use B-roll. That's my theory. But yeah, because
She is listed officially as being in this movie, and she did attend the world premiere.
that is so weird because they could have done so much with her talking. It's so weird. Instead, they went with all the dialogue to Rene Russo and Frigga, which is kind of surprising because we talked about her a lot in Thor 2 and missed opportunities. So I guess they heard our podcast. I'm joking.
Right. It's clear that they heard our podcast and decided, well, I guess we have to rectify this. Or they heard Ben and Matt's Marvelous Journey, where they also talked about this. So our two podcasts together finally made them realize that they had to rectify this. They gave Thor and Frigga a moment of reflection and an opportunity for him to get another pep talk and to become the person or the god that he needs to be one more time. And I am so glad that we got that moment because we did not get it in Thor the Dark World. We got a lot of Anthony Hopkins. We never got a lot of Rene Russo. And it feels like she served a greater purpose in this movie than she did in the first two Thor movies, and it's a relief that to me they had this payoff. And again, in a movie with a lot of payoffs, I actually think this might have been the best one because of how underserved Rene Russo's character was, and what they were able to do here was so impressive. And I just thought it was really well done. It was well acted, well performed, and Thor got his first hammer back.
Yeah, so I thought that was kind of funny too. But the fact that she acknowledges that she's a witch and like she knows these things, that just makes her character more clear because we never got that clearly understood in the first two movies. Like that's what I was aiming for in the second one. That's why I was saying like we should have had flashbacks with her and Loki of her teaching all that witchcraft and stuff and all the trickery stuff to Loki. And this kind of acknowledges that. So I was like, oh man, they're giving me what I wanted with Frigga, man. They're giving me like the knowledge that she has and that passing of the knowledge. And I thought it was cool that like, Tony has this moment with his dad to say goodbye, and now Thor has this moment with his mom to say goodbye. So they kind of make peace with that because Thor never got that chance to say goodbye to his mom. Same thing with Tony with his dad. I thought that was like a nice little touch they did there. It's very subtle, but like kind of reminds you of like all the times that in time travel movies where someone goes back in time to reconnect with a loved one they lost, kind of thing. And I like those kind of moments. I'll make a call. I'll do a shout out. Like, despite how bad Heroes the show was on NBC years ago, like 13 years ago, there was like this one moment where the one character, Hiro Nakamura, who's a time traveler, goes back in time and finds his mom, who died, later on in the timeline, but got to have this moment with his mom. And I love those moments because, like, it's it's impossible in real life, but it gives you that closure that these characters need. You know what I mean? So that was a great moment, and the fact that like Thor is just so depressed and not himself, and that his mom recognizes that. And I thought maybe it was like a subtle shot at Jason Momoa, but maybe I was just thinking too much out of it.
I mean, I would say that the new Asgard kind of looked like Aquaman's hometown anyway, so I just think it's really the visual cues of both of those little towns just were very, very similar in my mind, and I don't know if that has anything to do with anything, but it is worth pointing out and kind of talking about how some of these characters and movies share similar moments. Let's talk about Nebula and War Machine as they go and get one of the stones. And I love the fact that every time there's a Guardians of the Galaxy needle drop, it is so obvious when it's coming. And in this time, we of course get the ever so popular song, and we get Chris Pratt reliving his dance from the first scene of Guardians, and then he gets knocked out. And he is just treated like a complete goober in this movie. And I don't know, there's almost no way it could be a response to Infinity War. But man, it certainly comes across that way because Star-Lord is useless in this movie.
Yeah, even when he came back at the end, there wasn't really like much for Star-Lord to do when all the characters came back at the end. And then him interacting with Gamora, thinking that Gamora was the same Gamora, and it's not the same Gamora. So that was a little interesting. But yeah, they I don't know. The Guardians in this movie were kind of like brushed through, except Nebula. And even Rocket didn't even have as much time as I thought he would, being an Avenger and stuff like that. And he did give Thor the pep talk. But I felt like they kind of overlooked Rocket a little bit too. But Nebula kind of got the shine from all the Guardians. So at least they gave, a character that is not necessarily the star of the Guardians movies, but they gave that character, Nebula, like a lot of time. So that was cool.
Right. And of course, War Machine is able to go back with the stone, but Nebula is forced to stay behind because this is where we get the big reveal of Thanos and Gamora and 2014 Nebula, as this is where things get a little bit confusing, as once again we get Zoe Saldana playing an important role in an Avengers movie, except it is of course a past version of her. And this is where we basically set up what is going to happen at the end of the movie, as Thanos sees Nebula's memory and what she has seen, and he realizes that if they're going to go after all the Infinity Stones, he can get the Infinity Stones in one fell swoop and not even have to go through all the rigmarole of Infinity War. And that basically sets up the climax, and we really get to see Nebula's growth as we go through this, because the 2014 version is very angry and is very loyal. There's some definite grooming going on if you are kind of familiar with abusive tactics of family members. Like, there's definitely a lot of that going on in some of those scenes, and it was pretty obvious that Thanos was going to have to play some sort of a role in the ending climax, and I'm glad that he was kind of shifted to the background, because I did not want another movie about Thanos because of all the character work that had to be done, but I think this served its purpose.
Yeah, that was an interesting route to take, because basically when Nebula goes to 2014 again, the current Nebula Prime, as we say, her consciousness is still connected to the same network that 2014 Nebula's on. So in essence, she's able to detect when the other Nebula's there, and then that's kind of when things screw up. But it's not her fault. She didn't know that was going to happen, but it did kind of screw the plan up big time. But which leads to the battle, because once they can make that connection, they swap out the Nebulas, and the Nebula from 2014 takes the spot of Nebula, and then she goes back to 2019, or not 2024, or whatever it is.
2023, I believe, is what it would be.
So 2023, and then the 2014 Thanos follows that path and then goes in and blows up the Avengers tower. But that's kind of how it works. I know it's confusing, but that's kind of the way they made Thanos come to the current timeline from the past, since he's already dead anyway. So they kind of had to tie that in. But yeah, it all kind of makes sense when you kind of see it all together. But I thought Nebula getting a lot of the shine and having a lot of dialogue, it's credit to Karen Gillian, because I think she's a really underrated actress. I loved her in Doctor Who. And I felt like Nebula, you never got to see like a lot of her acting chops, and now we got to see that here. So that was really good, because she definitely had more screen time than both the Guardians movies, I think. So
yeah, it's wild to me that she got so much more time than the first two Guardians movies, and that's pretty crazy to me that that's what happened. But I'm really appreciative of the fact that they did that, and they gave Nebula so much time, because I think her character has been really, really underserved. And I think the other reason it's important to still bring Thanos back is so that he has his full army, he has his henchmen, he has all of the different things that could be at his disposal. 2019 or 23 Thor is not going to have that. So I'm really, really glad that they were able to bring him in a way that felt more natural, true to the story, true to the character, but that they were ultimately kind of shifting him to the background. And the reason that we are saving Hawkeye and Black Widow for last is because one of the most significant events of the entire movie happens during this sequence as they go for the Soul Stone. And once again, we get interactions with Red Skull, and they fight over who is going to sacrifice him or herself for the prize. And I think it could have gone either way, but it is ultimately Black Widow that sacrifices herself, and it is Hawkeye that gets the stone, and Hawkeye is going to be the one that is going to see his family. I thought the scene was extremely well done. I thought it was extremely powerful because Hawkeye basically says that he does not deserve to live because of everything that he has done as Ronin and killing all of the people that he was doing that he was doing on Earth. And I think it was a really well done scene. I know you probably once again marked out for Red Skull, of course, but I do have an issue with in both cases, in both Infinity War and Endgame, the sacrificed people are two female characters that are underwritten. First we had Gamora, and now we have Black Widow. And I don't know what this means for a Black Widow movie. They can still do a prequel, but it kind of bothers me, the two female characters who have not gotten their own movie, and I think in both cases did not really get a lot of time as anything except love or romantic interests, that this is what happened in both movies. So I do count this against the movie, even though, again, I do think the scene was really well done.
Yeah, it's kind of weird that they did that. I don't know if they did that subconsciously or whatever, but that's just kind of the way things happened. It's unfortunate that it kind of looks that way, but at the same time, like, it could have been a coin flip. But I'm more, like, interested in the fact that, like, Nebula knew that in order to get the Soul Stone that you'd have to sacrifice a person, but apparently they didn't know that. But you would think that during the whole team meeting that she would bring that up, that, hey, if we're going to get a Soul Stone on Vormir, that someone's going to have to sacrifice someone, but they didn't know that. So I was like, Nebula didn't tell them? So that kind of threw me off. But, had they gone in knowing that, I think they would have sent in different people. But that's just me.
And maybe she did know, but she didn't want to tell them because then it would kind of throw the plan off or something. That is definitely a logic gap in this movie that I could certainly agree with. But they have all the stones and they return, and they have to decide who is going to perform the snap. I think it's really well done that they have been able to get this all across by just saying a snap is going to do this. And as they are deciding who it's going to be, Thor wants to do it, but he's drunk, fat, and out of shape, and probably maybe would not be able to handle it. So it is Hulk that gets his big moment. And even though he doesn't get as much to do in this movie as Infinity War, he is the one who executes the snap that brings everyone back. And we'll get to what happens afterward. But how big was the reaction when he got the snap off?
Well, it was a big moment, but it wasn't like instantaneous like the way we saw it in Infinity War, right? Like it took a while for us to figure out that everything was coming back. The one thing that they showed was like the atrium, right? The birds. So that was like the first clue, but I thought maybe I don't know if they should have like cut to like some of the other characters like coming back really quickly, but they kind of did it slow, where like all of a sudden you hear on the command radio, you hear Falcon talking to Cap, but that was like much later on, so it was a cool moment, but it didn't feel as big because we didn't see the characters come back immediately. But once we got that moment later on, that's when the impact of that snap is felt. But it was kind of cool to see that self-sacrifice again. But you think about it, and it's the way that even Banner describes it. Like it makes it seem like the accident with the gamma radiation was no accident. Like it was almost as if it was meant to happen in order for this one moment to happen, so he can save everyone. So maybe in a sense that this is kind of like his full circle moment where he realizes that he was meant to be the Hulk, and that had he got rid of the Hulk earlier on in his life, that he would not be able to save the people now. So I think he realizes that, and that's kind of one of those full circle moments that was kind of like subtle, but I picked up on it because, like, again, like I'm very into that Hulk character and I want to see him cured, but I guess that's never going to happen now because he already found peace. So yeah, to get rid of the Hulk character, I think at this point is stupid, and I'm glad they didn't kind of do my rooting game of the cure, but in this case, he finds that peace within himself, and he finds the reason for all throese years of going through all this torture throughout it for his body and stuff like that for this one moment. So I thought that was a little kind of subtle thing they did there.
And the fact that he is still alive, and they can bring him back at some point in some sort of an advisory capacity, perhaps, or I don't know if he's going to be able to heal himself and fight again, but there are definitely still some things that they could do with the Hulk in the future. And who knows, maybe Mark Ruffalo wants to do these movies. It's got to be easy money at this point for him if he's going to be playing more of an advisory or more cameo roles. But of course, 2014 Nebula brings Thanos back, and immediately after the snap happens, two things happen. First, we see that Clint's wife calls him, and that is a great auditory and visual cue that the snap worked, because they probably could have waited until later in the movie, but it was a legitimately emotional moment when you saw who the person was that did the calling, and because it wasn't sexy, it wasn't a big moment of catharsis, but it was just a small moment to signify that yes, this did in fact work. And this was about 45 minutes to an hour left in the movie. And the rest of this is an action scene because Thanos blows up the Avengers building. I think this is something that we kind of all saw coming, that this is what it was going to come down to. And the original three Avengers of Captain America, Thor, and Iron Man start to fight Thanos while... I don't know about you, Brian, but Hawkeye just going through the tunnels, it gave me some Alien and Aliens vibes. What did you think?
Little bit, and I got confused too because when they showed that scene in the trailer, I thought he was on a ship, but it was just like a deep tunnel underground that's covered in debris. So I thought that was a nice little interesting kind of switch because it did look like a ship. But yeah, I definitely was getting the alien vibes too. And then as soon as he like points the arrow, and then he turns around and then points the arrow and sees all of them, and then it's like, oh, here we go. And then he grabs the Infinity Gauntlet and takes off. But that was the nice little cool like lighting moment, like the way they lit that shot, very similar to the Aliens thing, where you don't see much, and then once you point the camera and the light in the right direction, everything kind of gets exposed in the dark, and they did that shot really well.
Right, and then the battle continues on, and Thanos basically says that he is going to eliminate everyone. He's going to perform another snap and get the Infinity Gauntlet. And he's just sitting there waiting for the Infinity Gauntlet to be brought to him. And he raises his army, brings them in. And just when it seems like all hope is lost, that is when Captain America... No, actually, we have to go back because there's a big moment that comes before everyone comes back. And so Thor has two hammers, and he is trying to fight Thanos, and things are looking bleak as Thanos is about to literally murder Thor. And then the hammer flies by, hits Thanos, and Captain America is able to hold the hammer. He is worthy. This is something that I think has paid off from Avengers Age of Ultron, as he almost was able to get it up, but this time he is able to hold on to the hammer. Somebody in my second screening literally shouted "holy shit" when it happened, and I think that about captures it. This was one of the loudest pops of the entire movie when he got Thor's hammer.
That was me screaming "holy shit" all the way from California, by the way. But yeah, it was just an incredible moment, and like I was thinking like they did a callback to Ultron, that little moment from Ultron, and I was like, they're doing all these full circle moments, and they did this one. And I was just like, wow. And then it changes the dynamic again. Because now you have Captain America wielding the hammer, right? And he's not the god of thunder, but he can control electricity too. So I was just like blown away at the dynamic shift. And now that like he's worthy, we'll get to what happens to him later. But man, just Captain America wielding the fucking hammer of Thor, man. Who would have thunk it? But he's worthy, obviously, so... I guess that also means he's worthy of being king of Asgard, but yeah, like him in that moment, man, and then kicking Thanos' ass, it was great, man. And I thought he was actually going to beat Thanos too, like that, but I guess it wasn't enough. But just that moment in time, it felt like the moment when Stormbreaker first appeared, like comes down in Infinity War with Thor, and there's like, "Bring me Thanos!" Like this was that echoing of that moment, kind of. But instead, they did it with Captain America in this moment that they've been building up since Age of Ultron, for Christ's sake.
And then, as things look their bleakest, as Captain America is seemingly going to stand alone against an army, we hear a radio call from Captain Falcon, and thanks to Doctor Strange, we see a shit ton of people come out. Let's just put it that way. We see Black Panther, we see Shuri, we see Okoye, we see Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, all of the Guardians of the Galaxies, the armies of Wakanda, the different time fighters from various places. We see Wong. We see just about everybody return. This probably was the loudest reaction of the entire movie from an applause and pop standpoint, especially Spider-Man, especially Black Panther, but Spider-Man got a really loud reaction at my screenings.
Mine too. Like I felt like the walls fucking like move and shit as soon as Peter Parker came out, man. But it was cool too when Black Panther came out and the army came out and they started doing E-Bombay. Like the people in my row were going like E-Bombay, and then like they would go E-Bombay, E-Bombay. It was crazy. Like we were shouting the same time that Black Panther was commanding the army, man. It was a moment. And then when he came out, I shouted Wakanda forever, and people in my row were just like going nuts. And I don't know if it was just my row, but the theater too. But that was one of those great moments in the movie theater for me. Just that whole sequence, and then Spider-Man coming out to even louder reaction. That's a magic movie moment right there, you know? And it was just this moment, man, and it was just awesome and epic and just so satisfying. You know what I mean? Like all this weight and all this time, and now we get the new Avengers coming out to kick Thanos' ass as well. And then all the female characters coming up in one shot, even Pepper Potts coming out in the Iron Man suit from Iron Man 3. That got a big pop as well. And then when they did the shot of all the women together kicking ass, that got a huge pop as well. Like that whole sequence was amazing.
They need to do a female Avengers movie. That's what that scene clearly signified. Because there was a moment like in Infinity War, this was even bigger because you had even more characters involved in it. And there were just so many moments from this fight. You had Peter Parker interacting with Tony Stark and Tony Stark just hugging him, as it's very cathartic for him after feeling that he had failed. He did not, in fact, fail. We get a moment between Rocket and Groot. There's just so many of these. There's Gamora and Star-Lord. Star-Lord not realizing which version of Gamora he's seeing. And there's just a lot of it. And there's a point when Thanos decides to just fire on the entire planet and just try to blow everything up. And that's when we get the reintroduction of Captain Marvel, as she comes down to start kicking ass. We play a game with the Gauntlet as different members of the new Avengers. I think it is worth pointing out that we had Spider-Man, we had Valkyrie, we had Black Panther, and we had Captain Marvel, all doing various things with the Gauntlet as they are desperately trying to get it to the van. What a callback to Ant-Man with the song, the La Cucaracha song. I can't believe they did that.
I can't believe that they made that van significant. Like, that shitty van is so significant now that it's probably going to get, like, its own toy. You know what I mean? And, like, we thought nothing of that van, and all of a sudden it's, like, the most important... I guess you can call it the MacGuffin at the end of the movie, right? For the end of the movie at that point.
I would argue that the Infinity Gauntlet is still the main MacGuffin, but that van, which ultimately gets blown up, and I don't know how much it actually means in the end, but it definitely for a couple minutes there was going to be the big moment, but it gets destroyed, and Captain Marvel and Thanos have interactions, and Thanos does not do a very good job of kicking her ass, but he eventually is able to get the gauntlet on his hand, and he performs a snap. And nothing happens because Iron Man is, in fact, the one who has all of the Infinity Stones. And one of the things that Thanos had said at the beginning of the movie was, "I am inevitable." He echoes these same sentiments the 2014 version does. He says it, and then Iron Man, in a callback to the very first Iron Man, the ending of the first Iron Man, says, "I am Iron Man." He does the snap, and just like in Infinity War, there is another dusting. Except this time it's not the Avengers, it's not our protagonists, it is all the antagonists literally dusting away, and this time they are not coming back.
Yeah, that was great, and I kind of got this thing, when I do my YouTube rabbit holes the last couple months of like all these different theories, one theory that kind of kept popping up is that Iron Man kept favoring his arm throughout all the movies, and his arm gets injured in all the movies. Did you notice that?
I did not, but this is worth pointing out because, of course, his right arm basically goes to crap right away, and he cannot handle the fact that he has done this snap and it is ultimately what kills him. But continue on with your theory.
Well, I can't remember necessarily offhand. I have to watch it again, but I think whatever arm that he keeps injuring out through a whole movie ends up being the arm that he used for the gauntlet. But I'm not sure if that's actually true because, like, as I recall, he used his right arm for the gauntlet, but I think he was favoring his left, or something like that. But they kind of been teasing it, is what I'm saying. Like they been subtly teasing all these things with Tony's hand and his arm, and there was even a joke in one of the movies, I forget, but like it could be a sign of you're having a heart attack. And he was just kind of joking about that because he kept holding his arm. So they've been subtly hinting at it. You know what I mean? And these theories were right because he ends up being the one to not necessarily bring the people back, but to erase the enemies from coming. So yeah, it was just like a nice little touch. You know what I mean? Like they kind of built it up. And now I bet everyone's going to be looking in all these past MCU moments of Captain or Tony Stark holding his arm now, kind of hinting at it. But they kind of did for all these years,
which is fascinating to me that they would do that, and everybody goes away, and Thanos dies a second time. So
yeah, and I think I don't know, was that like a callback to Vision dying twice? But you know, again, Vision died twice, Thanos dies twice. It's kind of like this theme in the movie. Does Loki die twice? I don't know. He's still dead though.
Loki is still dead. There is one Nebula that died, but it is not the official Nebula, so that does not count as far as I'm concerned. It's the 2019 or the 2023 version, literally destroying and killing her past once and for all, and taking control. So that is what I'm going to consider it. And we get Tony's death scene as we get Pepper Potts, Spider-Man, and War Machine surrounding him. And of course, it is Pepper Potts that gets to have the last word with him. And he dies, and it is a monumental moment in the history of the MCU. And of course, we thought it was going to end with all of the characters at a wedding. As it turns out, we are ending with a funeral as all of the characters attend Tony's funeral, and they all get a little bit of a moment. And we see a couple people who have not been in the movie up to this point. We see Maria Hill. Now, there is one person, I don't know if you realize this, Brian, there was one person at the funeral. On first viewing, I absolutely had no idea who this person was. I think it was the kid from Iron Man 3.
Oh, I thought, okay, for some reason I thought, oh my god, is that Quicksilver from X-Men? Because it looks like the Quicksilver from X-Men. I was tripping out for a second, but I think I know who you're talking about. You think that's the kid from Iron Man 3, really? Wow.
Yes, that's who I think it is, because I cannot think of who else it could possibly be, because I had no idea who this person was, and it's 7 years later, so the kid was probably 10 or 11. Now he would be 17 or 18 years old at this point in real life. So yeah, that's what I think it was. I think that's who it was. You need to go down a YouTube rabbit hole and we need to figure this out officially, but I think that's the only one that makes sense. But it's pretty incredible to just see all of these characters standing there, having the Guardians, having Black Panther, and of course Nick Fury walks in, very reminiscent of the end of Iron Man. He does not say anything, there was no dialogue uttered, but he doesn't really need to serve much of a purpose in this movie. And Tony's funeral is just really well done, and there's a great conversation between Morgan and Happy afterward, and it was definitely very dusty in the theater while this was all going on.
You got the cheeseburger reference, right? That's straight from Iron Man 1.
I did. That was an incredible reference.
See, it's just all these full circle moments, and that's the theme of this movie, I think. It's just everything comes full circle. And yeah, I mean, that moment, man, I was just heartbroken, but at the same time, it's kind of like, well, he did his job. He set the stage, man, and now he's kind of ending this chapter. I just wish that like we had more interactions with him and some of the newer characters that we didn't really have a chance for. Like he did have his strong interactions with Doctor Strange, but I just felt like we could have had more moments with him in Black Panther. We never got Tony and Shuri in a fucking lab, which disappoints me, but that's one of those things that I guess we'll just imagine that we all want. But goddamn, I really wanted that scene with Shuri and Tony in a lab, but we're never gonna get it.
Unfortunately, we will not, and this movie probably could have very easily ended with Tony's funeral, but there was a little bit of setup for potential future movies, one of which I know you are going to be extremely excited for, as Thor decides to give up his kingship to Valkyrie, and hopefully this sets up Valkyrie for her very own spin-off. But Thor decides that he is going to become a pirate, and he is going to reform the Asgardians of the galaxy as he is on the ship with the other Guardians. There is no Gamora. I don't know what happened. Did Gamora just leave? Is that what is meant to happen? Because at first I thought, did she get dusted? But she's very clearly seen fighting against Thanos. So did she just leave? Is there I assume it is the 2014 version of Gamora that is still.
Yeah, so I think she's dead, and that she's never coming back, and that's the way it's going to be. And that
I see the reason I think that the 2014 version is still floating around is because there's very clearly a scene of Star-Lord searching for Gamora. So I almost wonder if that is going to be the plot line of Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and we are going to have Gamora in that movie.
possibly that makes more sense, but like we said, like even they even talk about it, like you can't take the once you give up your soul for the Soul Stone, there's no coming back from it no matter what. And they kind of re-emphasize that because like Hulk tried to bring back Black Widow, but despite all that power, like it's irreversible. You can't do it. So I'm under the impression that she's just gone because by virtue and nature of the stone, she's gone. If you bring her back, that just leaves the door open for Black Widow. But who knows at that point?
Time travel is very confusing, folks, but I know that you are very happy that not only did Thor survive, but he is apparently going to be in the third Guardians of the Galaxy, and given the chemistry that they all had together, and given Chris Hemsworth's ability for playing comedy, I think this is a tremendous setup, regardless of what direction they go into, because you also have Nebula as part of this, so there really is going to be a reconstituted version of this team, and I think it's really great.
I'm looking forward to these new interactions where they're gonna have to probably give updates to the Avengers on Earth. So I'm looking forward to that, where there's this connection now between the Guardians and the Avengers on Earth. So there's going to be this thing where they're going to probably help each other out, and I want to see that. I want more of that connectivity, and with Thor being there, it makes that connectivity even more. So I'm glad they did that, because now everyone's connected. Because every time you watch a Guardians movie in the past, it felt like this. Like they were distant and disconnected from the actual Avengers themselves, right? Now this fixes the problem and everyone's connected and knows each other and blah, blah, blah. So I like that, and I hope that they kind of stick with this Thor of him being out of shape and kind of depressed. But by the time we get to Volume 3 of Guardians, he's probably going to be back in shape. But I like that dynamic, and I love the joke about him looking like the Big Lebowski.
Right, a very solid joke by Robert Downey Jr. We did not mention that there was a conversation between Wanda and Clint, as they have both lost important individuals to their lives, and they had a very brief conversation. I have no idea what WandaVision is going to look like, because Vision's name was not even mentioned in this movie, and he is barely referenced, and that is pretty wild to me. But of course, Captain America has to go back and put all the stones back where they found them, and he does not come back, because he in fact goes to be with Peggy and to get his big dance in, and he goes into retirement. We see an older version of Captain America with a wedding ring. They definitely went out of their way to show that, and he bestows his shield not onto his best friend Bucky Barnes, but in fact to Sam, Captain Falcon. So Captain Falcon is now Captain America, and I assume that he and Bucky will be going on adventures on their new Disney Plus show very soon, and I think it was a tremendous moment to have this person of color now becoming Captain America. I think it might not mean anything to you or I, but I think there is a definite sect of the audience that this is going to mean a lot to.
For sure, and there was definitely a buzz in the audience when that moment happened, like changing of the guard. And I know, yes, Cap was not revealed as a Skrull, but that's still possible later on. He's
Brian. It's not happening. It's over. The party is over.
I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait 5 years on that one, because you can easily bring him back and find out that he was switched out in the '70s or something like that, and that wasn't the real Captain America that gave away his shield at the end. But anyway, I'm not gonna give it up. But yeah, that was.
It's over, Brian. It's dead.
Well, so was Star Wars, and then they brought it back for Force Awakens. But just my point is, like, it. The moment he's dancing, like I I thought that moment was just never going to happen, that he was going to dance with Peggy Carter again. And they gave it to us, man. And we talked about it.
And it was the ending of the movie too.
And we talked about it for so long. Like, I know we mentioned in the preview podcast he could possibly go back in time and retire with Peggy, but the ramifications of that. But he's dealing with the ramifications because obviously there's two Captain Americas now in that time, because one that married Peggy Carter and then the one that's still stuck in the ice that still has to go on his journey in order to get, go through the time travel to get to that point anyway, right? So that's the complications of time travel. So, but yeah, at least he gets to have his moment, man. And I started crying, man, because I was like, oh my God. This is the dance. This is the moment when he's going down to the ice that he said he's not going to have that dance with her, and now he's dancing with her. So that was that full circle, man. And goddamn, I was looking around the audience and people were crying too because they got it. Like, they understood that moment of what it meant for that, just to have a dance between those two. So I thought that was like a special way to end it. And I think that was something that people wanted that, we thought we couldn't have because of time travel and all that kind of thing. And now with time travel, we got that moment. So it was a nice, fitting way to end it.
It was literally the perfect encapsulation of everything that this franchise has been about for the last 11 years. Everybody seemingly got their moment to shine, especially among the original Avengers. And, of course, we're going to see what the new blood, so to speak, is going to be doing in the next few years with undoubtedly sequels of Doctor Strange and Black Panther, and we've got a Spider-Man sequel coming out, but you could not have asked for a more perfect ending to all of the original Avengers arcs, as Captain America is old. He might be dead by the time the next movie rolls around. We don't know. Tony Stark is dead. Black Widow is dead. Hulk is seriously injured. We know that Hawkeye is going to be on a Disney Plus series, and then he will probably be finished with his run as Hawkeye very soon after that. So we've kind of wrapped up all of the Avengers, and what an amazing movie with so many amazing moments. Brian, we are now going to draft, I think we could do 10 each. What do you think?
I guess so, man. I'm trying to think. I think we covered all the moments, but we'll go kind of list them all because I know there's some other things that I probably forgot to mention too.
Well, now we're drafting our favorite moments of the movie. So we're gonna make this important because I want to know what your favorites are, and we'll see if there's some overlap. We'll see if there's some controversy, some discussion, some dispute. So, Brian, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
I'll go first, and for me, the one moment that just was electric was the moment that he picks up the hammer, or Captain America's wielding the hammer. Man, I thought that was just incredible, and that was like a callback, like I said, to the moment in Infinity War when Thanos dropped it, or when Thor dropped down and said, "Bring me Thanos." That was incredible, and just one of my favorites. I mean, that's just the first one that comes to mind, not necessarily number one, because I'm going to watch this movie a bunch of times later on, but that's one of the first that come to mind.
All right, so I'm going to bring this podcast full circle. Last year, we did not draft the snapping in our draft. We somehow did not include that in our biggest and most important moments, so I'm going to rectify that. My two picks are each of the snaps, the first one by Hulk and the second one by Iron Man, because of the significance of those moments. It literally kills one character. It infirms another character. One snap brings everybody back and saves the day, so to speak, and the other eliminates the threat of Thanos once and for all. Those are such significant moments, and I also have to rectify our podcast from last year. So Hulk and Iron Man's snappenings are my 2 and 3 picks.
For me, I'm going to go with Peter Parker coming back, because that, I mean, like I said, that was probably the biggest pop, because I felt the walls shake. Like, I literally felt the vibration coming off the walls from the amount of screaming in that theater when he was resurrected, and he gave Tony the hug. Like, I can hear like all the people in the theater go, "Oh man," and everyone getting emotional and him hugging him. Like, that was a big emotional moment, and Tony needed that to feel complete before he died. So that gave him his like final, peace at mind for what happened with Peter Parker.
My next moment is going to be Captain America and Peggy getting their big dance. I don't think it's really such an amazing moment that I cannot imagine this not going in the top five. So I'm going to draft this as in accompaniment of my two snap-hitting picks because, again, as you stated, it is literally the perfect moment to end this franchise on, and I think it's something that is going to live long and be regarded as one of the best movie endings of all time. I think something that Avengers movies and MCU movies get criticized for is not so great third acts and not so great endings. This movie does not fall into that trap. This movie has probably one of the best endings of all time. So my next pick is the dance between Steve and Peggy.
My next one is the moment that Doctor Strange comes back and opens up all the portals, and everyone just comes in, and then just everyone is there. Wong's got his army from China, and then you got the Valkyrie. I don't know if she got other Valkyries. It just looked like it was just her, but yeah, like everyone just coming in and kicking ass. That's a big moment. Just incredible visually because it's kind of echoes that the famous shot which they kind of showed again from the first Avengers, the circling shot of all the Avengers. This is just like that, and then turning the scope up to 11.
I am going to take with my next pick the death of Tony Stark. Again, another monumental moment in the history of the MCU, which I differentiate from the snap-hitting because I just think it's so individualistic and it's so important to have this moment. And I think it's funny because I think it would be very easy to compare this to Logan's death in his movie, but this one felt so much different because it felt, I guess both of them kind of felt cathartic, but I think this one just felt so natural, and it felt like that we really had been through the ringer with Tony Stark, and by the end you couldn't imagine it really going any other way.
Me, it's just I guess the first time that they go to like New York in 2012, like that moment where they first time travel on the mission. I guess that whole build up and then the first time they go to New York in 2012, it's just so crazy to see that. But for me, it was like just a big moment because like they're just calling back to that original Avengers movie, and I remember being in the same theater, not necessarily the same theater number, but the same movie theater for like Avengers 1 6 years ago, and being there 6 years later and seeing the same moment, come a call back to those moments from the first movie, and just seeing them just land there in the middle of all the debris was just crazy to see, and it just sticks out of my head just seeing that because it just means that like they put so much thought into this movie that they're tying everything together.
I think that for me, I talked about this earlier. I'm really going to talk, and I'm going to go with the moment of at the support meeting where I don't believe he's ever given a name, but basically it's Joe Russo giving the story. I just think, again, bringing the humanity to this movie is so important, and it seems like that's what a lot of my moments have been so far, is just kind of the more emotional moments, and not necessarily completely happy ones either, but I just think it's so great to have that scene in this movie. So my fifth pick is that moment at the support group.
Mine is the reveal of Thor. When you first see him after 5 years and just seeing him, it's just so shocking. That sequence of him in the living room, it was just so jarring. It just sticks out of my head. It's one of my favorites because it just shows you how depressed he got and how much he's just trying to cope with like alcohol and junk food and stuff like that. And that's a relatable thing, I think, for a lot of, that's a human thing. Just when you're depressed and stuff like that, you kind of just wallow. And he was going through all that, and you saw him as more of a human than an Asgardian in that moment, and I was just kind of like blown away that he wasn't acting like the Thor that I'm used to, but that's because of all the guilt and the 5 years of guilt that he's built up in his head, so that for me just sticks out a lot.
My sixth pick, Ant-Man at the Wall, I think is just amazing, trying to find his name, or I'm sorry, trying to find his daughter's name to see if she was alive or not, and of course, what it leads to is just unbelievable. But for him to see his own name and then not see his daughter's name, it's got to be one of those really jarring things that I can't even imagine how that must feel to know that you had disappeared, but now you're back, but your daughter's still there. I think Paul Rudd is so good in this movie, and I think that scene where he has nobody else to play off is a perfect exemplification of his character. So my sixth pick is Ant-Man at the Wall.
My next one is Tony's funeral, man. Because like I said, I thought the shot of just like the way they shot that funeral scene where they just pan to all the people to in the back, from the foreground to the background of all the different characters. I pictured that in my head originally as a wedding scene, like almost shot for shot, because that's the way I just pictured in my head. Like if you're gonna put all these people in the background with Tony, and like if it was a wedding, at the foreground, but instead they did it with the funeral. So that was just like, okay, they're doing it the way I was thinking about it in my head, but instead it's a funeral, and of course it's just like it's Tony's funeral, and it's just, emotional and cathartic, and everyone's just having this somber moment in the theater as well. So that'll really, stick with me for a long time.
Right, and I have to pick Black Widow. I think somebody has to do it. It's going to be me. So my seventh pick is her death, because I think it's almost easy to forget it because of everything that happens in that third act with so many incredible moments. There's so much humor to this movie, but she makes a tremendous sacrifice. And you talked about how good Scarlett Johansson was, and absolutely it has to be her that gets mentioned at some point in this draft. So her being sacrificed is my seventh pick.
My next pick, it's kind of the montage of them trying to come up with the plan. Like you talked about how you like how, like heist movies come up with the plan in that little sequence. I just have this memorable moment in my head of like Tony and Black Widow just lying down trying to think, and then Hulk, I think, was like sitting on the ground, and they were just trying to think of like the best possible thing, and all of a sudden, like New York, and it just comes to them. That's 3 Infinity Stones right there. We're gonna go back to the Battle of New York. That one little moment of them just kind of sitting around and thinking, I really enjoyed that, because that kind of just reminds me of the old team, from like especially Avengers 2, when they're kind of grouped together and thinking out loud and trying to come together as a team and come up with the best solution. That really just sticks out in my head a lot.
My eighth pick is going to be Thor and Frigga's conversation, because I think it's the closure we did not get in Thor: The Dark World. We finally did get it here, and I think it does not make that movie better, but I think it gives Thor even more depth, and I think it gives her character a lot more respect and a more appropriate ending, as opposed to just being killed and having Anthony Hopkins utter nonsense in Thor: The Dark World. So that is my eighth pick.
My next one is at the beginning when they killed Thanos the first time, because when Thor cuts his head off, like my theater was kind of shocked and whatever, but I just felt like, man, that felt so good to see. You know what I mean? Like it felt so good to see that. I kind of related to when you watch Game of Thrones, and I've been kind of catching up on the last couple seasons, the last couple days as well. And it just feels like when you see a character that you kind of despise, right? And you finally see him get his head chopped off. It's so rewarding and gratifying, I think. And you get that moment on Game of Thrones. You kind of get that moment here, even though like at that moment they find out the snap is irreversible. But at that moment, it was so gratifying to see that kind of revenge on Thanos for what he did in the first movie.
All right, so I'm going to go with my number 9 pick. There's so many different directions that I can go into, so many different cameos that I can get into. But I am going to go with, what am I going to go with here? I'm going to go with the conversation that Tony and Howard have, because I think it is one of those moments that I think is really going to stand out as you binge watch the 22 movies and you see the journey that Tony goes on with his father, and the fact that he is able to get closure, and the fact that we get to see John Slattery in 1970s regalia again. I think it matters a lot. So that is my 9th pick, is Tony and Howard's conversation.
I'm gonna go with all the female Avengers in that one shot again, just kicking ass, and then on top of that you had Valkyrie on the flying Pegasus, which was awesome. That nice visual, and then Pepper Potts being in the Iron Man suit. I know we haven't seen that since Iron Man 3, but just knowing that she can kind of like, take that responsibility and get the suit on and, help out whenever she needs be. That's a good feeling, because I never kind of pictured Pepper Potts as like that kind of role, right? Her role is more of like an executive kind of role, and to see that in the biggest battle in the history of the franchise, and probably on Earth at that point, it was very gratifying to see her do that, especially seeing her grow from Iron Man 1 in that kind of like secretary position to where she's at now. It's very gratifying.
I'm really glad that you went for that as your 10th pick. My 10th pick, I'm going to pick something that we have not even talked about. There is a moment very early in the movie when Nebula and Tony are rescued by Captain Marvel that Nebula and Rocket Raccoon hold hands. That is going to be my final moment because it is a moment where two people who have literally lost their entire family are able to come together. And we've never really had a lot of interactions between Nebula and Rocket, but this was a genuine moment between two creatures who should not exist. And I know that there's going to be a ton of fan fiction that's written about these two characters because of them holding hands, but I mean, there was just a lot. There were literally almost tears in the beginning of this with some of those interactions. But in a movie with a lot of humor and a lot of these smaller things, that may have been the smallest. And I wanted to mention it because we've been recording for an hour and 40 minutes and we did not talk about it. So that is going to be my 10th and final moment: is Rocket and Nebula holding hands. And that, I can think of no more fitting way to end this conversation or this draft than that.
Yeah, that's very touching considering all the shit that Nebula has done too. Like that's the other thing with that Nebula character. It's kind of like it's a redemption for her after all the shit that she's done, and you kind of like they touch on that later on when they go to 2014. But it's a great arc for her in this movie for sure.
All right, we have one more draft. We are going to draft our team of Avengers. I get to go first this time, and then you'll get to pick your next two. Is there really? You are. I know who you're going to take based on who I'm going to take. There is no other answer in my mind than Captain America, who did not get drafted last year because he was in the movie so little. But he is my first pick because, goddamn, was he great! He got to hold the hammer in his hands. He got to get his dance. He got to swear. He got to beat himself up. This is Captain America's movie, so I'm picking him first.
So we're just picking our favorite Avengers, right?
We are drafting our own team of Avengers, yes.
So I guess I'll go with Tony because he figured out time travel, and he was willing to make the sacrifice, man. So Tony, the OG, well, not necessarily the OG. Everyone kind of considers Captain America the first Avenger, but truly Tony was the first Avenger for us.
Within the context of the MCU, Iron Man is always going to be regarded as the first Avenger, even though Captain America is technically the first Avenger, and the Avengers team is named after Captain Marvel. This is who the first Avenger is going to be in our minds. You also get another pick. You get to pick the next two. So you get Tony, and who else?
I'm going to go with Hawkeye because he was so badass in this movie, and he was, again, like, even though he's got no powers, he felt like a significant person in this movie. And I like that feeling of, like, having a human being that doesn't have any powers and having a lot of power in the movie itself, in a movie filled with superpowers.
So you have picked Tony Stark, and you have picked Hawkeye. For my pick, I am going to go with Ant-Man because I think Paul Rudd, there are segments of this movie that he just flat out carries on his own, especially when he is by himself, and he is the impetus for them even trying time travel. So I cannot imagine him not going in this draft. So that is my second pick. So I have Captain America and Ant-Man.
I'm going to go with Hulk because now that he's big and he's got the brains, he can almost do it all. I don't know if he's 100% now because of what happened with the gauntlet, but him being that strong and that smart at the same time changes the game a lot, and to the point where it shocked me, to the point where I wanted to see that story happen, but I guess not.
Nebula, because she literally killed herself to wipe away the past, and she got her very own character arc and got so much to do in this movie. So my next pick is her for all the reasons that we've been mentioning for the last hour and 40 minutes or so.
I'll go with Black Widow because she seems, even like in the most dire times, still willing to be the leader for everyone and kind of take the charge and take the reins and willing to make those decisions, even though she might not be, all well to herself. Everyone's going through depression and guilt throughout this time, so, credit to her for kind of keeping the team together even after the devastation.
Look, I'm a huge Rocket stan. This is what I did last year. I drafted Rocket and Groot. This year I'm not going to take Groot, but I'm still going to take Rocket, despite the fact that he did not tell the rest of the Avengers that they were far from the shallow now. I said I was going to give this movie minus 6 stars if he didn't say it, but despite that, this movie was still pretty good without that line.
Credit to I'm gonna go with War Machine. I feel like War Machine got a lot more to do with this movie than a lot of the other movies. I felt like he had a lot of good dialogue at the beginning, though. When he goes to get the Power Stone, I thought that was really fun to watch, and then him interacting with Nebula was fun to watch. But then he kind of gets lost at the end. But I felt like he needs the credit he deserves for kind of being one of the originals as well, an original Avenger that doesn't get the love and recognition as being the original Avenger. So credit to him, and he got the Power Stone, so he did his job.
Yeah, War Machine was pretty great in this movie, and Don Cheadle often does not get mentioned as far as being some of the great performances in the MCU because he just really doesn't get as much to do as some of the other characters. But I really thought he did a great job here, and I'm glad that he got just a little bit more to do than he has previously. So we each get one more pick, and I am going to go with somebody who is not an OG Avenger. I'm going to go with Peter Parker because of the fact that even though Tom Holland is in this movie for like 3 minutes, every time he's on screen, he kills it. He gets an enormous reaction. But if you watch that scene with Tony Stark, and this is definitely something, if you are seeing this again, pay attention to how Tom Holland acts in that scene. Because as much as people talk about how great he was when he got dusted last year, I think he may have topped it with his performance off of Tony Stark's dying. He is such a good actor, and he's probably not going to get awards consideration as Spider-Man, but he's somebody that's going to get awards consideration at some point because he just kills it every time out and is a really impressive actor.
I'm gonna go with Thor last, and it's weird because I know last year Thor was high on our list, but this time because of him being out of shape and looking like Jason Momoa, and I don't know, just him loving beer so much more in this movie. Yeah, I'm gonna go with Thor, even though he was not at his best. The performance was still good, but that's because he's dealing with a lot of shit and a lot of guilt, like we said, like not aiming for the head the first time, and probably if he did aim for the head the first time, things would have turned out much differently, right? So for him, I understand, like, he's not the same person, and he's not the same ass kicker. And even in the final battle, he was not the same ass kicker that he was in the battle at Wakanda. And it's very, like, obvious. So I thought that's pretty significant, but at the same time, at least he got his closure, and he's an OG Avenger. And I'm pretty sure he'll get back into shape. I think he's going to get motivated now, and he's got the time. So credit to Thor, even though he was a badass last year. This year, not as much of a badass, but still significant.
All right, Brian, this is probably going to be one of our longest podcasts ever. We're not going to do any burning questions, though, because, again, we've almost gone 2 hours, and we will, I'm sure, get to talk about Marvel at some point. We'll do a preview of some sort. Once we know more information, Brian, any final thoughts on the movie?
I'm going to go with Thor last, and it's weird because I know last year Thor was high on our list, but this time because of him being out of shape and looking like Jason Momoa, and I don't know, just him loving beer so much more in this movie. Yeah, I'm going to go with Thor, even though he was not at his best. The performance was still good, but that's because he's dealing with a lot of shit and a lot of guilt, like we said, like not aiming for the head the first time. And probably, if he did aim for the head the first time, things would have turned out much differently, right? So for him, I understand, like, he's not the same person, and he's not the same ass kicker. And even in the final battle, he was not the same ass kicker that he was in the battle at Wakanda. And it's very, like, obvious. So I thought that's pretty significant, but at the same time, at least he got his closure, and he's an OG Avenger. And I'm pretty sure he'll get back into shape. I think he's going to get motivated now, and he's got the time. So credit to Thor, even though he was a badass last year. This year, not as much of a badass, but still significant.
It absolutely does. I don't think you could ask for a better film-going experience. This is something that I am never going to forget. And I think we often complain about the runtimes of wrestling shows and movies and TV shows. This was 3 hours and 2 minutes. This absolutely flew by in both screenings. I never felt like the movie dragged, and I think that is a testament to how good the Russos are at pacing these movies and the writers. This was just everything that I could have hoped, and in a lot of cases, I think it over-delivered. And for a movie like this to still be able to surprise, to over-deliver, to be as funny, to be as emotional, to in some ways be small, but also grand, You could not have asked for anything better than this. And I'm still not sure it's as good as Black Panther, but I have a feeling that we are going to put this into our pantheon at some point in the next year or two because it was just that good. And there are just so many moments that are going to stick with me because again, this pays off 22 films and 11 years worth. So I don't know what else to say, Brian. This really floored me, and I know you are excited to see it again. I know I'm going to be seeing it one more time in theaters at least, and we'll still get to bask in this for a little bit longer.
The one thing I'm hoping out of this, and I know we kind of, like when we did the Black Panther initial podcast last year, we were hoping for Oscar nominations, and that came to fruition. The one thing I'm hoping for this movie in particular is the best editing category, and we talked about that with Infinity War on the latest Redux on the podcast. But I feel like this is worthy of a best editing nomination for sure. Like in terms of like pacing and keeping the pace for a 3-hour movie, it's exactly the editing you needed, and it's perfect editing to do that. So you got to credit the editor, man, for creating the pace that he did. Especially even with Infinity War, I think you got to credit that too. But I want an Oscar nomination for best editing. I don't. You can do it for all the visual effects and all that stuff, but I think the most important thing in terms of technical stuff was the editing, and it just paid off in this movie.
All right, Brian. So we are done with the Avengers. We are done with the MCU for a while. And it is worth pointing out that we will probably not be doing a Spider-Man specific podcast because there are already 2 other Spider-Man podcasts on the Enter the Real World feed, and we are probably going to cede those conversations to them. So Brian, I know that we'll get our thoughts on Spider-Man at some point, but I think it's a good time to just say that we are going to be taking an extended break from the MCU, and I'm kind of happy about that because I like talking about the MCU and that us coming into existence what we did. There was always going to be a lot of MCU conversation, but I think we want to move away and we want to talk about other superhero movies.
And we're definitely going to get the opportunity with the Summer of Batman coming up, so that's kind of what's to come. And we still got to plan out all the major details, but probably the first Batman review that's going to come out in the next month or two is going to be, what, Batman Returns?
Yes, because we did review the first Batman already. We will probably repost that episode on Enter the Real World feed. But we cannot get to the Summer of Batman without first getting through X-Men. And I have to be honest, Brian, I saw Dark Phoenix trailers before both of my screenings. Woof, woof, woof.
What I was shocked at, it was like there was a small group of people cheering, and I was like, are you serious? And then people were kind of like laughing, and then I didn't know if they were cheering ironically, but there's definitely a mixed review, or like a mixed bag on it's just like, god damn, why are you remaking X-Men 3? But we'll get to that when we review X-Men 3, but why in the world would you remake X-Men 3?
I don't know, man. Like this is going to be bad. But we are going to talk about all of the X-Men movies next week. We are going to repost our review of the first X-Men, and also record a new review of X-Men 2, which I'm very interested to see if that ends up being in the superhero pantheon, since that is generally regarded as the best team-up X-Men movie in the franchise. So that is what we will be doing next week. We are not taking a week off. We are just going to go right into X-Men because Dark Phoenix comes out on my birthday, June 7th, 2019. So excited, Brian. Can you tell how excited I am to see that on my birthday?
It's the 10th X-Men movie, man, so you better appreciate it. And did you notice they circled the X?
I do know they circled the X, and let me tell you, that does not add to my excitement for this film at all.
Well, at least you can look forward to, it being over. Pretty much. And look forward to that Deadpool cameo at the end where he just deletes the universe.
That would be a pretty spectacular way of ending things, as we are going to talk about the X-Men universe over the next several weeks, and then we will go into our Summer of Batman. We want to thank everyone for listening to this marathon podcast. I know there are tons of Avengers podcasts out there right now. We very much appreciate your continued support. For Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening to our thoughts on Avengers Endgame.
Roads, where we're going, we don't need roads.